Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Podcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott. Join Bill and me as we dive into how AIOps can be used in cybersecurity. Starting with an article I penned for Forbes as a jumping off point, we're going to look at several other areas where AIOps for cybersecurity comes into question. Listen as we discuss why AIOps is a strategy, not just a platform, especially regarding cybersecurity. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, everybody, to the AIOps Weekly Podcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and Bill Driscoll, my co-host. Bill, how are you today?
Doing great. How about yourself, Sean?
I'm doing well, doing very well. Happy Friday. So this week we are going to take a little bit of a not a detour. We're just going to kind of make a little bit of a left here, because one of the things we talk about a lot with AIOps, and the thing I keep saying is AIOps is a strategy. It's not a platform. And when you start looking at AIOps, we've spent a lot of time talking about AIOps in service management, AIOps in configuration asset management, and obviously the use cases around monitoring, event management, and things like that, correlation. But one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about is cybersecurity. And recently I wrote an article that Forbes published, essentially saying, titled "Coining the Term AISecOps: Why Your Business Should Consider AIOps for Cybersecurity." So I'm not here to toot my own horn, but I did write this article. So, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because there's a couple other articles that I came across, written by Pam Baker over at was it Dark Reads? I think, is that what it is?
Yep.
And she does kind of a two-part series on AI and cybersecurity, both where AI falls down and where AI is doing well. So I thought that using this topic, my article to kind of launch this topic would be interesting today. So that being said, when we talk about AI ops, and in cybersecurity, therefore, one could call it AISecOps, which is not a big stretch because we do have DevOps. The use case is relatively the same, right? There's a ton of data coming in, right, from systems like Splunk and other SIMs and things like that. And a lot of times the operations and cybersecurity organizations are actually reading the same data. It's becoming more and more blurred whether a infrastructure outage is a cybersecurity issue or vice versa, right? And you're really combing through massive amounts of data. And we as humans are much better at analyzing data at a summarized level, especially through graphics. We're a very visual species, and we're not really great at crunching massive amounts of data, looking for patterns and anomalies and things like that. And that's a lot of times when you find cybersecurity issues is through the exceptions and the small anomalies. So, and I think that looking at deploying AI in the enterprise for cybersecurity is smart, because really cybersecurity it's a business problem and not a technical solution, because you're seeing more and more impacts of cybersecurity, not only from impacts to consumers, like I don't know how many consumer protections subscriptions I have right now, because my data has been hacked so many times, whether it's Target or something else like that. And I've lost track. I lost track, I guess, at some point, how many of these things I have. And but there's also reputational impact, fines and levies, especially with GDPR in Europe, and you're seeing legislation trying to be passed in California. And once it gets passed in California, then it's pretty much going to be required in all states, because you can't exceptionalize California if you're a marketing team against the rest of your country. It's just going to be too difficult to do that. So there's a lot of expense around it, and there's fines and there's class action suits. I mean, I've been reading other articles about some of these class action suits take 5 years, right? And so, so cybersecurity really is a business problem, and it's starting to become more and more talked about or oversight at the board level. So, using AI ops in the cybersecurity world just makes a lot of sense. So, Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think you're spot on that in the world of security, you're dealing with streaming data. You're looking at activity, at behaviors, at data that's coming from the network, data that's coming from sources, from the traffic in the network, and it's all of the same data that you see in IT operations. It's just probably a little more. It's a little more about the traffic that's happening versus the health and performance of the underlying infrastructure. But that you're still doing the same pattern searching, you're still doing the same thresholding, the same type of anomaly detection, the same type of clustering, and trying to get to root cause and what are all the symptoms of a root cause or of some sort of attack. And so I think it's the same technologies that are going into IT operations, or the same ML AI that's going into IT operations platforms are also going into the security operations platforms. And a lot of those platforms are becoming each other, really. I think a lot of the IT operations platforms now have security modules or integrations with other security platforms, and vice versa. Security platforms are also maybe part of a bigger framework IT operations platform. So really, it's the same underlying kind of ML models, whether it's supervised or unsupervised type of models. It's being applied across both, and so you definitely have a merging of really AI and ML kind of going into both areas, security and IT operations, and where they overlap and how they can be combined together. I don't know if it fundamentally changes. It's new tools to both organizations, and I think both organizations, whether ML or AI exists, needs to work closely together, because the same impacts they're having. Typically, when there is an issue, it's both organizations, both operations and security, working together to resolve the issue and shut down wherever the perpetrating or the attack is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So what's interesting is, so I wrote this article for Forbes kind of talking about that, everything we talked about. And then I came across this article from Pam Baker over at Dark Reads. And I thought this was a really good, interesting kind of point counterpoint, right? My point of using AI in the cybersecurity space, and then she writes an article where AI falls down into cybersecurity. And I thought this was she has some really good points. And then she actually has another article, which was actually part one. I know this is getting confusing, right? So she's got two articles, part one, part two. Part one is practical uses of AI in cybersecurity. Part two is where AI falls down in cybersecurity. I would like to actually talk about where AI falls down in cybersecurity first. So we'll start with the end. And because she makes a lot of really good points, and I think that these points are not just for cybersecurity; they're for the operations teams. Um, you know, AI is not delivering as expected, right? And she mentions a Gartner quote that says, security analysts should treat, quote unquote, treat AI offerings as experimental complementary controls. That article was written in 2020, or that quote came from a report in 2020, September 2020 from Gartner. So, but I think it's still relevant. And then she interviewed a bunch of people in here, and a lot of the themes were there's a lot of noise in the market, right? And um, AI really and machine learning needs to be for just cause, or there's a lot of companies that are using it just because, not just cause, but just because. And a lot of organizations are overstating their AI and ML capabilities, and and this undermines the entire market of using AI when a few people or a few companies overstate what they can do, and it just ultimately just creates a lot of apprehension in the market and confusion. And we've talked about this before in the AI in infrastructure operations. Is like there's just so many companies using the term AI ops now, like what's real, what's not,
Yeah.
right? And what's I wrote this, it's the same product. We're just, putting new lipstick on
Mhm.
it, right?
Yeah, it's just the hype cycle is definitely happening here with AI ops, and I think like the fear is that there's so every marketing group, every product management, product marketing is they want to be able to tie machine learning and AI to their product and promote, advocate. And so while it may be being used in some parts of the product, it's sort of talked about in the marketing and the literature and the promotion as it's we're a machine learning platform and AI, it's a key feature. But when you really drill back down, they said a lot of times it's actually it's still humans writing signatures, padded signatures that identify attacks, and they're labeling that machine learning, and so you sort of you're losing the market's kind of losing credibility, and people are just putting aside AI and machine learning as it's all just hype. Whereas whereas the reality is there is a lot of hype, but I think developments are happening maybe faster and in unexpected ways, and I think it's going to be upon us sooner than we realize. But I liked a few of the three different things that kind of jumped out at me that she talked about. One of them was that really a lot of times what's billed as machine learning is really still humans coding algorithms that identify different signatures. You talked about one of the risks is AI is its own attack surface, and she elaborates more on that. That AI is just another computing algorithm that hackers can use to access and sort of disrupt the machine learning and the AI to kind of get around these detection. And really, with machine learning is constantly being trained, you can get a hacker in there to actually start training your machine learning algorithms to not see what you need them to see. So um, versus if it's a human deliberately built filter, you deliberately built signature or firewall or whatever it is, or access control. Machine learning is going to learn whatever data is coming at it, and if it's being fed nefarious data from a cyber attacker, that's what it's going to learn as normal, or it's going to learn that that's okay behavior. So I think some of these things that I just mentioned, it's more, I think it's falling short of the promise, and then but it's also another cause of it could create, there's risks, I guess, of exposing security or exposing holes in your security the more you're using machine learning and AI. So I think when we get to the
Yeah.
next article, we're going to see that the benefits and the use cases for it far outweigh some of these downsides. I think these downsides are just things that you got to be aware of and be cautious about how you're deploying it, and also what tools you're selecting and putting the right kind of scrutiny on the tools you're selecting.
Yeah, I think the reality is, right, is that the cybersecurity space is in the same space as the infrastructure operations. And that is that you either are going to build it yourself or you're going to rely on your vendors to do it, right? And provide machine learning. And unless you buy a machine learning platform, you're going to get vendors that are embedding it,
Hmm.
and you kind of have to do your due diligence with them and figure out, okay, what is marketing and what is real, right? What's marketecture versus real architecture?
Hmm.
But I think that last point was actually a really interesting point, and it's unique to cybersecurity. I think that the idea that bad actors could push things towards these tools for them to detect. So it's basically like let me like throw an elephant at my guard dog,
Hmm.
right? And would you teach the guard dog how to keep elephants away from the house, and he's not paying attention to the mouse that's going through the little
Right.
hole, right? And I found that really super interesting, and I'm going to dig into that more around really how accurate that is. But it's a very interesting concept. I mean, you don't have that concept in infrastructure operations because there really is no bad actor in infrastructure operations. It's just change, right? Change is the bad actor. What they say, 60% of outages are caused by
Hmm.
change. um, so but in cybersecurity, you've got this constant influx of uh, hackers and bad actors trying to constantly exploit vulnerabilities, and they're going to use whatever tools that are at their disposal, and they're going to have AI tools too, right? And machine learning tools. And they already employ bots and automation to send out, 100,000 or a million malicious emails in one click, right? 10 years ago that would have been a lot harder, but now it's a lot easier. And they're going to be using AI where what's the scary thing about AI on the bad side is where they can actually start using third party data and bringing all this data together and using AI to literally create customized phishing attacks for every single person. And that starts getting kind of
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, and it's whatever
So then,
organization learns faster wins, right? The faster you learn, the faster you win. The faster your technology learns, the faster. And it's a war. It's a battle out there between nefarious actors, like I said, and these organizations. So you can't just abandon the machine learning because the enemy is using it, right? And is learning faster if you're not.
no, you actually have to use it
Yeah.
more, right? Yeah, you're right. It's like anything else, it's a cold war, right?
Hmm.
I build up mine, you build up yours, and then I build up mine, you build, and it's this constant back and forth. And um,
Yep.
so, all right. So moving on to the other side of the article, so this is actually part one, and this is where she talks about putting AI to practical use in cybersecurity. So, um, I know you had a bunch of opinions on this, so I'll let you kind of lead off on this one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I mainly I thought it'd be interesting to just go through. I think she's got 6, 7 different different areas, and I think just walking through some of these areas and examples that she puts through is and commenting on them makes sense. So I think the first thing, the first couple, back end event processing is the first one. That really, I think we talk about this in AI ops is the machine learning and the AI is going to be able to do great analytics and kind of processing your events and identifying where there are things that need to be looked at. What are some of the anomalies? But what it's not doing yet is just driving immediate action, is driving automation and controlling your environment and making changes to defend. And so I think that AI and machine learning is more back end event processing and then providing the suggested actions or suggested information or recommended information or compiling that information that's useful to humans to take those actions and secure the network. So that's one use case. I think that back end event processing, and then the second one I'll just mention, and maybe Ed, you kind of continue from there, is just what she calls super secret, in your face, invisible stuff. So I don't know, in your face and invisible, I guess is good. It's a good term or combination of terms, but I think that there's a lot of just ways AI and machine learning is happening kind of quietly, under the surface, such as like biometrics and fraudulent charges on the credit card and login attempts. And I think she suggests really look at across your industry, look across the cybersecurity industry, and you're going to find sort of just understated, it's very small targeted use cases where it's going to be able to apply, and not trying to make a generalized sort of machine learning approach. So those were the first two that I thought were interesting, but I don't know if there were any of them that stood out to you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that super secret in your face stuff, and she references, like you said, catching fraudulent charges on credit cards and things like that. From the consumer side, it looks like super secret, right? Special stuff, invisible. From the back end, I can tell you it's extremely complicated to be building systems doing fraud detection,
Hmm.
things like that. So it all depends on your perspective of whether it's super secret or invisible, because the people who are building those systems don't feel that way. Um, yeah, I think there's a couple here. She talked about detecting novel malicious code and using AI more in endpoint protection is becoming more and more prevalent out there, and you're seeing some large companies starting to invest more of actually deploying micro AI engines inside the code itself to detect at the device
Hmm.
level, because they may not be connected to the internet, a laptop or something or a phone, and being able to push that out there and allow them to start, seeing that is good. Permission management is another area, and that's kind of interesting, in this kind of world of zero trust, right? And how can you use AI to help you in your zero trust structure and doing permission management based on using AI to say, look, if someone hasn't connected to a particular server in a while, then will disable that account for them, or that permission for them to access it, because clearly they don't need it, and then they can come back later and request it. And the last one, there's a couple more in here, but the last one, and the one that we talk a lot about on my other podcast, is IoT, right? And just IoT at scale, right? And this is
Yeah.
kind of what we talked about in earlier in this podcast. Is, cyber, AI and machine learning is really good at processing, large amounts of data. And when you get into IoT, you have large amounts of sensors and IoT devices out there, all pushing information out, and using machine learning and AI is a really, really good use case. No, not very different than, an AIOps platform monitoring, lots of network devices and laptops. And essentially the operations team are monitoring the same thing. They're monitoring those IoT devices too. They're just looking at the data in the context differently,
Mhm.
right? So same data, looking for trends in performance or things like that, whereas the security team is looking at trends and patterns around possible vulnerabilities or exploiting those
Right.
devices. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
I
So
thought that
go ahead.
it's interesting because in the IoT example, and actually, I think the second example is very specific, in your face stuff. It's about very specific use cases where you can train AI and machine learning using models to like detect specific signatures, detect specific behaviors and patterns. And it makes sense to do that at scale and let the machine learning algorithms figure out what those are. So it's sort of like the more specific the use case, machine learning does really well because you can kind of optimize the models there. And then on the other extreme, it's sort of they use the word or just looking for anomalies or looking for things that you just aren't even thinking of, aren't even realizing, and letting machine learning sort of look at that very unstructured, find things that we aren't even thinking of, we aren't even looking at, that's happening, that just doesn't make sense. And I think that that's also where you can apply machine learning. And then there's sort of that middle part, which is not quite a point problem, but has some complexity, but are things that we've been trained as humans to kind of look for as normal or not. I mean, that's where the humans exist. And so I do think if what I said makes sense, that machine learning and AI kind of sits on both sides of the humans, the very rare things that you're not looking for, and then the very specific use cases, and we sort of sit in that messy middle.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that the last two episodes, right? Is, humans interaction with
Yeah.
machines and machines interacting with humans. So
Yep.
awesome. Well, I think this has been a great discussion, and uh, we'll be talking more about AI ops and cybersecurity in the future. But I just thought it was a really good, kind of a little bit of a turn off of our normal AI ops and the infrastructure
Hmm.
operation. So, with that, I think we will wrap up for the
Great.
day. Anything else, Bill? Anything on your mind, or
Oh, lots on my mind. Just
any
nothing
any plugs?
relevant.
Anything you want to plug?
Plug up.
I feel like we're a radio show now. Do you need anything to plug?
Yeah.
Anything? Um, So good. Well, it's been great. I appreciate everybody for listening in, and we will see you again
Yep.
next week.
See
Take
ya.
care.